The envelope slid across the white tablecloth so smoothly that for one strange second I had the absurd thought that the three of them must have practiced it before I arrived, that somewhere between the wine selection and the private dining reservation they had rehearsed the angle of the wrist, the distance from her father's hand to my plate, the exact amount of pressure needed to make thick cream paper glide without catching on the linen. It stopped beside my water glass with a soft sound, barely more than a whisper, but in that room it felt louder than a slammed door. The steak in front of me was still bleeding into its own reduction. The candle between us trembled every time the waiter passed the closed double doors, and my wife sat with her shoulders straight and her eyes lowered toward the rim of her wine glass, as if the envelope had appeared from nowhere, as if it had not been planned, as if she had not known precisely what her father was going to do. That was the part I remembered most afterward. Not the money, not the humiliating legal language, not even the way her mother watched me with the composed pity of a woman observing a damaged object being removed from a room. It was Serena's face. It was the absence of surprise. It was the faint relief held carefully under her skin, the way her mouth softened for half a second when the envelope left her father's hand, because the thing she had not been brave enough to say to me herself had finally been placed on the table by someone who considered cruelty a form of efficiency. Her father, Victor Langford, leaned back in his chair and adjusted one cufflink with his thumb. He had always done that before saying something he believed would settle a room. He was a man who had built his personality out of expensive restraint, the sort of man who could insult a waiter without raising his voice and later call it standard. His wife, Meredith, sat beside him in pale silk, her pearl earrings catching the candlelight each time she turned her head a fraction of an inch. She had barely touched her food. She never ate much at dinners, where she intended to judge other people. Serena sat across from me, beautiful in a black dress chosen with the precision of a campaign photograph, her wedding ring bright against the stem of her glass. She did not look like a woman ending a marriage. She looked like a woman attending a difficult but necessary committee meeting. "Open it," Victor said, and his voice was so mild that anyone listening from the next table might have thought he was offering me a birthday card. "It is better for everyone if we handle this like adults." I did not reach for it right away. I looked at his fingers, still resting near the edge of the envelope. His nails were polished. His cufflinks were silver and black onyx. His watch cost more than the first warehouse I ever laced under my own name. Then I looked at Serena. Her eyes were still down. She lifted the wine glass, took a measured sip, and lowered it again with the small controlled movement she had learned in executive dinners, the kind of movement that told people she was thoughtful, measured, and difficult to shake. I had seen that performance earn her rooms. I had admired it once. "What is this?" I asked. "A practical solution," Serena said, without meeting my eyes. The words were not cruel by themselves. That was how people like Serena survived themselves. They learned to wrap violence in neutral language, until even betrayal sounded like management. Practical solution, transition plan, reputational alignment, personal complication. I had heard the terms slowly replace human words inside my own marriage, one at a time, until there was no room left for husband, home, loyalty, or shame. I picked up the envelope. It was heavier than it needed to be. Thick paper, embossed with the name of a firm I recognized immediately, not because Serena had told me anything, but because I had spent the previous 2 weeks quietly reading every clue she thought she had hidden. I slid one finger under the flap and opened it carefully. No tearing, no sudden movement. My father had taught me years ago that when a man wants you angry, give him patience. Patience frightens men who need you reactive. Inside was a private separation agreement, typed with the clean cruelty of people paid to make humiliation enforceable. It offered money in exchange for silence, cooperation, confidentiality, and a public statement that would frame the end of my marriage as mutual, amicable, and unrelated to Serena's expected promotion. It barred me from commenting on her fitness for leadership. It barred me from contacting the board, executives, investors, or media. It included language about my emotional instability, my alleged financial dependence, my resistance to Serena's career advancement, and my agreement not to interfere with her public transition into senior leadership. I read the first page slowly, then the second, then the third. I did not need to read all of it. I had reviewed enough merger documents, hostile tender structures, poison pills, financing covenants, and employment agreements to recognize what this was. It was not a divorce proposal. It was a disposal plan. It had been drafted for a man they believed would feel grateful to be bought and afraid to be exposed. It had been drafted for a husband they thought had no leverage. They had put my worth on thick cream paper. They had reduced 3 years of marriage to a number large enough to insult me and small enough to tell me what they believed I was. I turned the final page and found the signature line. My name had been typed beneath it. Adrian Veal. Plain, centered, waiting. I folded the agreement once, then again, and set it beside my plate. My steak had gone cold. Serena watched the paper touch the table, but still would not look directly at my face. Victor smiled, not widely. He did not need to. In his mind, the hard part was over. The unsightly husband had been shown the door, and all that remained was to persuade him that the door had always been his idea. "You can take a few minutes," he said. "We are not unreasonable." "No," I said quietly. "You are not careless." That made him pause, only slightly. Meredith's fork touched the edge of her plate and stopped. Serena finally lifted her eyes, but only for a second, just long enough for me to see warning there. Not apology. Warning. She was already telling me silently not to embarrass her. My name is Adrian Veal. I was 39 years old that night, and for the last 4 years I had been married to a woman who believed simplicity was the same thing as lack. That misunderstanding had protected me longer than love did. Serena met me at a charity arts fundraiser in Bellevue, not in the ballroom where donors performed generosity under chandeliers, but in the narrow side gallery where smaller works had been arranged along a grey wall and ignored by people too busy being seen. I was standing in front of a painting of a harbor at dusk, studying the angle of the light on the water, when she came beside me and said it looked lonely. Not peaceful, not pretty, lonely. That was the first thing she ever said to me, and I remember thinking that she saw more than most people in rooms like that. She wore a green dress that night. Her hair was pinned up loosely, and she held one champagne flute by the base instead of the stem, because she said the glasses were too top-heavy and badly designed. I laughed because she was right. We talked for 20 minutes about nothing useful. Art, bad catering, the strange social choreography of donors pretending not to check each other's names on the seating chart. She asked what I did, and I said I worked in logistics software. That was true in the same way saying the Pacific Ocean is wet is true. It told her nothing that mattered, and she did not press. At first, that felt refreshing. Back then, I was still rebuilding Halcyon Dynamics, though publicly it did not look like rebuilding, because the acquisition had been structured through holding entities, debt conversions, board seats, and quietly negotiated voting rights. Halcyon had once been a forgotten logistics software firm with outdated contracts, exhausted engineers, and patents its own executives barely understood. Everyone else saw a broken company. I saw infrastructure. I saw the nervous system beneath shipping networks, cold storage routing, emergency supply planning, and commercial transport optimization. I saw what it could become if someone removed the vanity, cleaned the balance sheet, and stopped letting men in expensive suits pretend buzzwords were strategy. I acquired control in layers, quietly, after a brutal takeover battle that taught me how much public credit could cost. By the time I married Serena, Halcyon was mine in the only ways that mattered, but my name was not the name people repeated in articles. There was a board, there was a chairman, there were operating executives, legal shells, voting trusts, and enough distance between my face and the public company that I could still walk into a restaurant without anyone deciding my net worth from the reservation. I preferred it that way. I had no interest in being the loudest man in a room. My father had spent his life telling me the loudest man was usually compensating for an emptiness no one had named yet, and the older I got, the more often I found him right. Serena loved that privacy when she believed it was modesty. She called me grounded. She said I did not make her feel like she had to perform. She said men in her industry were always trying to turn themselves into brands, and I seemed too complete for that. In the beginning, she would come to my house after late meetings, kick off her heels in the hallway, and stand barefoot in my kitchen while I made pasta or coffee or grilled cheese at midnight. She liked that my car was older. She liked that my shirts were good but not showy. She liked that I remembered the names of servers and security guards. She once told me that being with me felt like stepping outside a storm. I believed her. That was one of the things betrayal changes afterward. It does not only wound the present, it walks backward through memory and poisons moments you had stored as proof that you were loved. The change did not happen all at once. People like to imagine betrayal as a door bursting open, a discovered message, a single clear fracture. In reality, it is often a slow climate shift. A word becomes a tone becomes a habit becomes the weather inside the house. Serena entered the executive track at Halcyon 3 years into our marriage, not because of me, not officially, and not because I placed her there. She had talent, I will not pretend otherwise. She was sharp, tireless, and terrifyingly good at reading ambition in other people. She could sit in a meeting with 12 executives and know by the end which 4 were insecure, which 2 were lying, which 1 wanted her seat, and which 1 could be turned. She understood language as architecture. She could build bridges, cages, mirrors, and traps out of the same sentence depending on who was listening. That gift made her rise quickly. It also made her dangerous long before she became openly cruel. At first she asked for small adjustments. Could I wear the charcoal jacket instead of the brown one when we had dinner with her division head? Could I not mention that I still repaired my own appliances because people might misunderstand? Could I order wine with more confidence, not because it mattered, just because certain people notice? She said these things lightly, brushing lint from my sleeve, smiling as if she were protecting me from embarrassment rather than identifying me as the source of it. I let it pass. I told myself marriage included compromise. I told myself she was under pressure. I told myself that executive rooms are stupid places with stupid rules. And if wearing a better jacket made her life easier, what kind of husband would make a point of refusing? Denial often arrives dressed as generosity. Then came the dinners where I was present but edited. Serena would place a hand on my arm when I began answering a question and say, "Adrian keeps things very simple." It sounds sweet when she says it, does it not? Keeps things simple. But under the table her fingers would press once, hard, a signal to stop. If I mentioned supply chain architecture, she would laugh softly and say, "He can make shipping containers sound like poetry if you let him." Everyone would laugh because they thought they had been invited too. If someone asked where I saw the industry moving, she would answer for me, turning my silence into charm and my restraint into ignorance. Once, at a private dinner after an investor presentation, a board consultant asked me what I thought of Halcyon's positioning in predictive cold chain markets. Serena cut in before I could respond and said, "Adrian is blessedly outside all that politics. He is the part of my life that reminds me not everything has to be strategic." The table found that touching. I looked at her and saw, for the first time clearly, that she had not protected me from the room. She had protected the room from knowing me. I said nothing that night either. Silence can be discipline, but it can also become complicity in your own erasure. Mine became both. By the time Serena was shortlisted for the CEO position, she no longer asked me to adjust. She corrected. In the mirror before events, she would stand behind me and lift my collar, change my tie, step back, evaluate me, and sigh in a way that made the room colder. I would ask what was wrong, and she would say nothing, which meant everything. She began sending me links to profiles of other executive spouses, as if I were a presentation deck that could be improved by benchmarking. She bought me shoes I did not like and then watched whether I wore them. She asked me not to drive my old car to certain places. She said the valet line had optics. She did not say I embarrassed her, not directly. Directness would have forced her to hear herself. The first time she publicly replaced me was at a winter reception in Medina, held in a glass house overlooking the lake. I had not been invited, not initially. Serena said the guest list was tight, mostly strategic, mostly internal, probably boring. I almost stayed home. Then the chairman texted me about a side conversation he wanted to have off-site, and I arrived late through the side entrance, intending to stay 10 minutes. I found Serena near the fireplace with a group of executives, laughing with a man named Colin Mercer, whose husband stood beside him in a navy suit and projected exactly the right kind of polished, expensive support. Serena touched Colin's arm and said, "That is what partnership looks like at this level. Someone who understands visibility, Someone who knows the room is part of the work. She said it with me standing 3 feet behind her. She knew I had arrived. I saw her see my reflection in the glass. She did not turn. She let the sentence finish. It hung there between us, clean and deliberate. I left before she had to introduce me. That night at home, she found me in the kitchen making tea. She had taken off her earrings but not her makeup. Her face looked tired under the perfection. She stood in the doorway and said, "You disappeared." I looked at the kettle. I did not disappear. I left. You could have said hello. You could have turned around. Her eyes sharpened. There it was, the shift I had come to know. The moment she stopped being wife and became counsel for herself. Adrian, that was a professional event. You cannot show up unexpectedly and then punish me for not managing your feelings in real time. I remember turning off the burner, even though the water had not boiled. The small click sounded too loud. I am not asking to be managed, Serena. Then what are you asking for? I wanted to say respect. I wanted to say honesty. I wanted to ask when she had started speaking about me, as if I were a room she had outgrown. Instead I said, "Nothing tonight." She studied me with a kind of controlled irritation, then laughed once under her breath. That laugh was one of her weapons, soft, disappointed, almost maternal. It made disagreement feel childish. "You do this," she said. "You go quiet, and then I am supposed to guess which invisible line I crossed." I looked at her then. "No," I said. "You know." For the first time that night, she had no immediate answer. But the silence did not soften her. It only taught her to become more careful. After that, the pressure became domestic. That was where Serena was most effective because public cruelty has witnesses, but private correction can be made to look like intimacy. She would take calls in the study and stop speaking when I entered. She would close her laptop halfway when I walked behind her chair. She began sleeping lightly, or pretending to, turning away from me in bed with the stiffness of someone sharing space with an inconvenient. At breakfast, she would ask what my day looked like. Not with interest but with inventory. If I said I had meetings, she asked with whom. If I said I was reviewing documents, she asked for what. If I said nothing much, she gave a small nod, as though confirming a suspicion. The more she rose inside Halcyon, the smaller she needed me to become inside the marriage. Her parents intensified what she had already started. Victor and Meredith had never truly accepted me, but for the first 2 years they disguised it as curiosity. Victor liked to ask where I saw myself in 5 years, even after I had married his daughter, as if I were interviewing for continued relevance. Meredith liked to praise my humility in a way that made humility sound like a manageable defect. At their anniversary dinner, she once placed her hand over mine and said, "Adrian, it is so rare to meet a man who does not need to be impressive." The table laughed warmly. I smiled because I had been trained by then. I had learned that defending yourself against a compliment makes you look insecure, even when the compliment is carrying a knife. 6 weeks before the envelope, Serena received unofficial confirmation that she was the leading internal candidate for CEO. The news did not come to her directly from the board, but from the network around the board, which in certain companies is more influential and less accountable. I knew before she told me. The chairman, Elliot Harrow, had informed me that her name was rising aggressively, that certain board members admired her discipline, her strategic instincts, and her ability to present Halcyon as a company ready for expansion. He also told me there were concerns, expense anomalies, unusually curated social narratives, a pattern of selective disclosures about personal matters. Nothing fatal yet, nothing proven. I told him to proceed with the standard review and said nothing to Serena. That night she came home with champagne, not the bottle we kept for anniversaries, not something we would drink together at the kitchen island, but a label selected for celebration in front of an imagined audience. She placed it in the refrigerator and said, "We may have reason to open this soon." I asked, "Good news?" She smiled without showing her teeth. "Potentially." I waited. She did not continue. Instead, she looked around the kitchen, at the books stacked near the window, at the old ceramic bowl my mother had made, at the worn cutting board I refused to replace because my father's knife marks were still in it. Something like impatience moved across her face. "We should talk about the house," she said. "The house. If things move the way they may move, There will be more hosting, more visibility. This place is comfortable, but it is not exactly aligned. Aligned with what? With where life is going. I ran one thumb along the edge of the counter. It was a small movement, grounding. Where is life going, Serena? She opened the refrigerator again, adjusted the champagne bottle by a fraction of an inch, and closed the door. I need a partner who understands that some rooms require a certain language before you even speak. I almost laughed, not because it was funny, but because she had finally come close to saying the true thing. And I do not speak that language. You refuse to learn it. That sentence stayed with me, because it was the first accusation that sounded like mourning. For 1 second I saw not only contempt but fear. Serena had spent her life climbing toward rooms where she believed safety waited. She mistook status for protection, polish for worth, power for immunity. My privacy frightened her because she could not tell whether it was strength or absence. In a different life, if she had trusted me enough to ask, I might have told her the truth. In this life, she had already decided the truth was whatever made me smaller. The first real crack came 2 weeks before dinner. It was a Tuesday evening, rain against the windows, the house quiet except for the low hum of the dishwasher. Serena had gone to a late strategy dinner and left her tablet open in the study. I was not looking for evidence. I needed a charger because mine had split near the end, and Serena kept 3 identical ones in the drawer beside the desk. Her email was open. The message at the top was from Meredith. The subject line was blank. The preview read, "If Adrian will not step aside quietly, your father knows a firm that handles these things discreetly. You cannot become CEO with that man attached to your image." I stood there for a long time. Rain moved down the glass in thin silver lines. The dishwasher clicked into a drain cycle. Somewhere in the house, the heating system breathed through the vents. I read the preview again. Then I touched the screen. The email opened. Meredith had written in full paragraphs, of course. People like her believed cruelty became respectable when formatted well. She reminded Serena that leadership required sacrifice, that women at her level were judged unfairly, that any weakness in presentation would be weaponized, that Adrian's lack of sophistication, undefined career visibility, and quiet lifestyle would invite questions. She said Victor had spoken to someone who could prepare a clean private separation. She said the agreement should include generous compensation because men who felt respected were less likely to become vindictive. She said Serena must not let sentiment ruin the one opportunity she had spent her adult life building toward. Then the final line, "You have been carrying him long enough. It is time to put him down gently before he pulls you with him." Carrying him. That was what made my hand go cold. Not because it was plausible, but because I could hear Serena allowing it. I could hear her silence around those words. I could imagine her reading them, leaning back in the chair, telling herself her mother was harsh but not entirely wrong. The mind is merciless when it finally admits what the heart has been refusing to see. I copied nothing. I forwarded nothing. I did not need to. I had already learned enough. The next morning, I asked the chairman to widen the ongoing ethics review quietly. Not formally, not yet. I asked him to preserve communications tied to the CEO process, external consultants, executive expense accounts, and any private legal expenditures rooted through corporate resources. Elliot knew me well enough not to ask for drama. He simply said, "Understood." Should I know why? Not yet, I said. That was when I began to change privately, not visibly. Serena saw what she wanted to see. A husband growing quieter under pressure, perhaps wounded, perhaps pliable. I let her. I began sleeping less, but not from panic, from inventory. I reviewed trusts, voting rights, governance structures, board authority, executive appointment procedures, and the exact limits of Serena's access. I read old messages with new eyes. I remembered every dinner where Victor had asked too casually about my work, every moment Meredith had described me as sweet, every time Serena had said, "You would not understand this world." I did not rage. Rage would have been easier. Instead, a cold, logistical clarity began assembling itself inside me. The dinner invitation came on Wednesday. Serena said her parents wanted to take us to the Merrow Room, a private restaurant where Victor liked the lighting, and Meredith trusted the staff not to interrupt emotional violence. She delivered the invitation while standing in the doorway of our bedroom, scrolling through her phone. "This Friday," she said. 7:30. "My parents want to talk." "About what?" She did not look up. "Just some practical things." I watched her thumb move across the screen. "Serena," she paused. "Yes, are we all right?" That made her look at me, not soften. "Look." She had trained herself so thoroughly that even an intimate question passed through calculation before reaching her face. "Of course," she said, "we are under stress. This transition affects everyone." "This transition, you know what I mean." I did. That was the problem. Friday came with rain that stopped just before dusk, leaving the streets black and reflective. I dressed simply, deliberately. Navy suit, white shirt, no tie, the watch my father had worn for 30 years. Serena noticed. She stood in the bedroom doorway already dressed, her earrings like drops of ice against her neck. "No tie," she said, "no tie. It is a formal private room." Private being the key word. Her expression tightened. "I am not in the mood for cryptic tonight." "Neither am I." For a moment we stood on opposite sides of the bedroom, as if the marriage had become a hallway neither of us wanted to cross. She looked at me with frustration, but beneath it I saw something else. Relief again. She believed the uncomfortable part would be over soon. She believed I was walking into a room where her family would do what she could not. That belief steadied her more than love ever had. At the restaurant, Victor was already seated with Meredith. Of course he was. Men like Victor arrived early when they wanted territory. He stood when Serena entered, kissed her cheek, then gave me a handshake warm enough for witnesses and empty enough for truth. Meredith touched the air beside my face and said, "Adrian, you look well," which meant you look manageable. We ordered. Victor chose the wine without asking. Serena corrected the waiter on the pronunciation of a vineyard she had learned about from me years earlier. I watched her do it and felt something old and small collapse quietly in my chest. For the first 20 minutes, they performed dinner. Meredith asked about my recent travels, although she had never cared where I went unless it reflected on Serena. Victor discussed market volatility in the tone of a man reciting headlines as if they were insight. Serena spoke about operational culture, talent density, succession optics, and the burden of visible leadership. She was brilliant, I will give her that. She could make ambition sound like public service. Victor watched her with proprietary pride. Meredith watched her with hunger. I watched all three of them and realized I was not sitting with family. I was sitting with a board that had already voted. The envelope came after the main course arrived, and before dessert menus could interrupt the ritual. Victor did it smoothly. 2 fingers, a thin smile, open it. It is better for everyone if we handle this like adults. When I finished reading and placed the agreement beside my plate, silence gathered around the table like another guest. "How long have you known about this?" I asked Serena. She drew in a breath through her nose, the way she did before difficult presentations. "Adrian, this is not meant to hurt you." "That is not what I asked." Her mother set down her fork. Meredith could not resist entering any silence that made her daughter look unprepared. "The timeline has been evolving," she said. "Serena is entering a level of responsibility that requires certain personal realities to be addressed." "Personal realities," I repeated. Victor's smile sharpened. "Let us not pretend confusion helps anyone. You and Serena want different lives. She needs freedom to step fully into hers. You need security. We are prepared to provide that security in a way most men in your position would consider generous. In my position," he looked pleased that I had offered him a place to put the knife. "Adrian, you are a decent man. No one is disputing that. But decency is not the same as suitability. Serena's future is not small. She cannot be anchored to someone who refuses to understand scale." Serena closed her eyes briefly, not in pain, in impatience. I saw it. She wished he had said it more elegantly, not that he had not said it. I turned to her. "Is that what I am?" She opened her eyes. "Adrian, an anchor." She held my gaze then, finally. Her eyes were glossy, but not with grief, with the strain of holding a role too long. "I think you are comfortable where you are," she said. "And I am not. I think I have spent years trying to bring you with me, and you have mistaken my effort for criticism." It was breathtaking, that sentence. It carried just enough truth to be useful, and enough distortion to become a weapon. She had tried to bring me somewhere, yes, but not as myself. She had tried to bring a version of me she could display without explanation. Victor leaned forward. "The agreement is clean, confidential. It protects her, but it protects you as well. You will receive enough money to live very comfortably. Far more than any court would guarantee under the circumstances." "Under what circumstances?" His eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. "Under the circumstances of your actual contribution to Serena's current life." Meredith touched his sleeve, a small warning. Victor ignored it. Arrogant men rarely resist a room they believe they own. "You should be grateful we are doing this privately," he said. "Once Serena takes over as CEO, men like you become inconvenient. Men like you." He said it the way a person might say mildew. Serena did not speak. That was her first true answer. I looked at the envelope, then at Serena, then at Victor. Something inside me went completely still. Not numb. Numbness is a shutdown. This was the opposite. This was every nerve becoming precise. There is something almost elegant about betrayal when the person doing it believes they are being reasonable, I said. Meredith frowned. "I beg your pardon." "Nothing." Victor tapped the envelope. "If you sign tonight, we will make sure the company never hears that you have been unstable, dependent, and living off your wife while she built a real future." That sentence changed the room, though none of them understood it. It crossed the line from contempt into coercion. It was no longer only Serena letting her family remove me. It was a threat clear enough for counsel, ugly enough for memory. My phone vibrated beneath my folded hand. I glanced down without moving my head. A message from Elliot Harrow lit the screen. "Need your final decision on CEO appointment tonight." I covered the phone again with my palm. The timing was almost absurd. Life rarely grants theatrical symmetry, but when it does, the temptation is to mistake it for justice. I did not. I knew justice would be slower, colder, and more procedural than any of them imagined. Victor pushed a pen toward me. "Take your time," he said, though his tone meant the opposite. I picked up the pen. Serena's shoulders lowered by a fraction. Meredith relaxed. Victor smiled. I did not sign. I turned the pen once between my fingers and set it parallel to the envelope. "Is this really what you want, Serena?" It was the last door I opened for her, not because she deserved it, but because I wanted no ghost afterward. I wanted no future version of myself lying awake wondering whether she had been swept along by them, whether fear had trapped her, whether one honest question might have reached the woman who once stood barefoot in my kitchen and called me safe. She folded her napkin slowly and placed it beside her plate. "I want a life that fits where I am going." There it was, no hesitation, no tears, just ambition without memory. "Then I will not make this harder for you," I said. Victor chuckled softly. He thought surrender had a sound, and he was hearing it. That small laugh stayed with me, because it revealed the entire architecture of their mistake. They thought I wanted to be accepted into their world. They never considered that I might own the floor beneath it. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and thanked them for dinner. Meredith blinked, as if manners at that moment were vulgar. Serena looked confused for the first time all night. "Adrian," she said, "what are you doing?" "Leaving." "We are not finished." I looked at her. "Yes, we are." I walked out before any of them could say something memorable enough to ruin the elegance of what they believed they had accomplished. The waiter opened the private room door. The sound of the main restaurant returned, silverware, low voices, rainwater dripping from coats in the entry. Ordinary life continuing around a marriage that had just been reduced to paper. At the valet stand, I stood beneath the awning and looked back through the restaurant glass. I could see their silhouette, Victor leaning toward Serena, Meredith lifting one hand in restrained agitation. Serena still seated, not collapsed, not grieving, calculating. Always calculating. My phone was in my hand before the valet reached me. Elliot answered on the first ring. "Adrian." "Take her out of consideration," I said. A beat of silence, then understood. "The internal review begins at 8 tomorrow morning. Full communications pull. Executive expense review. Outside counsel present. Preserve deleted recoveries tied to the CEO selection process, the consultant network, and any legal expenditures." Another pause, longer this time. "How wide?" "Wide enough that no one can later say we were curious only where it was convenient." He exhaled. I will convene the committee. Elliot. Yes, no theater. You have my word. I slept almost not at all. I spent the night in the guest room because I did not want to stand in the bedroom and measure what had disappeared from it. Serena came home a little after 11. I heard her key in the door, the pause in the foyer, the sound of her heels being removed one at a time. She did not come looking for me immediately. That told me her parents had advised restraint. Let him calm down, they would have said. Do not chase her. He needs to feel the weight of what he is losing. Around midnight, she opened the guest room door without knocking. You are being dramatic, she said. I was sitting in the chair near the window, still dressed, shoes off, hands folded. The room was dark, except for the streetlight through the curtains. No, I said. She crossed her arms. You walked out of a serious conversation. I walked out of a threat. Her face changed. Only slightly. Victor should not have phrased it that way. But he meant it. She looked away. You are focusing on the least important part. I almost smiled because that was Serena in one sentence. The wound was never the wound. The problem was always the way you reacted to it. What is the important part? I asked. She remained near the door, not entering fully. That mattered too. Some part of her understood there were thresholds she could no longer cross casually. The important part is that my life is changing very quickly, and you have made it impossible to talk about that without turning it into a referendum on your feelings. My feelings? Yes, Adrian. Your feelings? Your pride, your discomfort with my world, your refusal to show up the way I need you to show up. I looked at her standing there in the doorway, lit from behind by the hall light, and saw what years of compromise had purchased. Not understanding. Permission. I had taught her that if she framed contempt as ambition, I would absorb it quietly. I asked one thing. Did you authorize that agreement? She swallowed. I reviewed it. Did you authorize the language about instability and dependence? Her silence answered before her mouth did. Legal language is protective by nature. Protective of whom? She did not answer. Then she said, you do not understand what is at stake. I do now. For the first time, unease moved across her face in a way she could not fully contain. What does that mean? It means I understand. She stared at me for another moment, searching my face for the familiar softness she could press into guilt. She did not find it. Her expression hardened to compensate. Fine, she said. Sleep wherever you want. She closed the door, not slammed. Serena never slammed doors when she was frightened. She closed them carefully, preserving the fiction of control. At 7:40 the next morning, I stood inside a private conference suite on the 42nd floor of Halcyon's headquarters. The city below was still pale with early light, office towers rising out of a grey morning, the lake beyond them flat and cold. Serena had been in this building hundreds of times. She had ridden elevators to executive floors, spoken in conference rooms, given presentations sharp enough to silence skeptics, and walked through the lobby with the calm authority of a woman certain the building was beginning to recognize her. She had never stood in that suite. Very few people had. It was not used for celebration. It was used for decisions that needed to happen above noise. Elliot arrived first, carrying no bag, only a slim folder. He was 62, elegant, tired, and one of the few men I had trusted because he had never once confused access with entitlement. Behind him came outside counsel Nadine Cho, whose expression suggested she had been born unimpressed, then compliance head Marcus Veal, then 2 forensic data specialists, then the independent governance advisor the board had retained during the CEO process. No one asked me how I was. That was kindness. In serious rooms, concern is sometimes best expressed as competence. At 8:03, I gave permission to widen the review. Marcus began with company communications. The first search terms were neutral: CEO transition, spousal, reputation, personal, domestic, legal, consultant, then names, mine, Serena's, Victor Langford, Meredith Langford, the law firm on the agreement. The board influence consultant Serena had cultivated. The first results came in scattered fragments of ambition dressed as strategy. By 9:15, scattered became clustered. By 9:42, clustered became pattern. A message from Serena to a consultant 3 weeks earlier read, We need to assess whether my personal situation creates optics risk. My husband is not aligned with the executive profile. He is private to the point of appearing unsophisticated. I am working on a transition that will resolve this before any announcement. Another to Meredith Reed. I cannot have him in the room during final board impressions. He makes people underestimate the seriousness of my life. A message from Victor to Serena said, "The man can be handled. Your mother is right. Offer him enough to preserve his pride, but not enough to invite litigation." Then came Serena's reply. "Pride is not the issue. He has never understood scale." I stood by the glass while Nadine read excerpts aloud. Her voice was even, which made each sentence worse. Documents have a way of stripping betrayal of music. On the page, there was no tone to soften it. No room for facial expressions, no chance to say, "That is not what I meant." The words simply existed. Elliot looked at me once, then looked back at the documents. He did not apologize. That too was kindness. At 10:07, the expense entries surfaced. 3 payments routed through an executive discretionary account, coded under strategic leadership preparation, external reputation counsel, and transition risk advisory. The vendor name was abbreviated, but the tax identification number matched the law firm that had drafted the separation agreement. Serena had not merely conspired with her family to remove me. She had used company-linked funds to prepare the private legal instrument designed to silence and discard her spouse before a promotion. That transformed moral ugliness into governance exposure. Companies can survive arrogance. They cannot ignore executives who use corporate resources to manage personal concealment during succession. At 10:31, Marcus found deleted calendar entries. One with the law firm, one with Victor, one labeled image alignment, one marked private dinner, no assistant visibility. At 11, a recovered draft statement appeared in Serena's files, not finalized but unmistakable. It described the dissolution of our marriage as a mutually respectful separation following a period of personal strain. It included a line about my desire to step away from public involvement, while Serena continued to serve Halcyon at the highest level. I had never seen it. I had never agreed to it. In her future, even my disappearance had been scripted for her benefit. That was the moment something in me shifted from grief to aftermath. Grief still assumes a living connection to what was lost. Aftermath is what remains when even grief understands there is no body to recover. At 11:30, Serena was informed that the CEO vote had been postponed. At 11:47, she was asked to report to an internal review meeting. At 12:06, she learned the meeting was about her. I did not attend. I stayed in the suite because I wanted no accusation that this was marital revenge, wearing corporate clothing. Facts would do what facts do when given enough light. They would sit there. They would remain. Updates came in intervals. Serena denied first. Marcus reported that she seemed genuinely offended by the premise of the inquiry. She asked whether other candidates' private lives had been reviewed with the same aggression. She framed the investigation as bias against an ambitious woman managing a complex personal transition. Then counsel showed her the expense records she minimized. Those had been reputation planning resources. Executive transitions often required private risk mitigation. Then came the messages she reframed. The language had been unfortunate, taken out of context, written under pressure from family members, not reflective of her respect for me. Then came the agreement. The room went quiet. By 2:15, her building access was restricted. By 2:30, her executive files were locked. By 3, the board's emergency committee had removed her from CEO consideration, pending full ethics review. At 3:17, her email was frozen. At 3:22, her strategy folders went dark. At 3:30, she was escorted not by security in a humiliating parade, but by human resources with professional softness. That was worse for her. Serena could have survived drama by turning it into persecution. Procedure left her nothing theatrical to fight. Victor called me at 4:05. "What have you done?" he demanded. I was still in the conference suite. The city below washed in late afternoon light. I let 1 full second pass. Then I said what you taught your daughter. I let image mate reality. "You arrogant little bastard." There he was at last. No cufflinks, no thin smile, no adult handling, just the man beneath the polish, furious that the object had spoken. "You do not understand who you are dealing with," he said. "I understand exactly who I am dealing with. My attorneys will bury you. No, Victor. Your attorneys will bill you." He went silent. Rage often needs resistance to climb. Calm leaves it searching for stairs. "You think because you have some influence with the board that this is over," he said. "Serena is the most qualified candidate they have. They need her. They needed who they thought she was. And who are you, Adrian? Really? Some quiet little husband playing at power because your ego got bruised." That was when I understood he still did not know. Not fully. He knew I had access. He did not know the shape of it. He did not know my signature controlled the voting trust that could appoint or block the next CEO. He did not know the chairman's deference was not friendship, but governance. He did not know because Serena had never bothered to find out. She had mistaken what I did not display for what I did not possess. "You will learn enough soon," I said, and ended the call. Serena called an hour later. I let it ring twice before answering. "Adrian." Her voice had lost its surface. That unsettled me more than I expected. For years I had heard Serena in calibrated registers: wife, executive, daughter, hostess, strategist. This was none of those. This was a person falling through the floor. "Yes, what is happening? You had a review meeting. Do not do that. Do not speak to me like counsel. What is happening? Why does Elliot know? Why does Marcus have my messages? Why am I locked out of my own files? They are not your files." A sharp inhale. "Adrian." That single word carried plea, accusation, disbelief, and the muscle memory of command. She was still reaching for the version of me that softened when she said my name in pain. "You used company resources to prepare a private agreement coercing your spouse into silence before a CEO appointment," I said. "You concealed material, personal, reputational risk while seeking executive office. You represented yourself internally as socially unencumbered while privately planning a staged separation. The board has exposure. The review is appropriate." The silence afterward was long. When she spoke again, her voice was smaller. "You sound like you are reading a charge sheet." "I am trying to be precise." "Why? Why are you doing this to me?" I closed my eyes once. "Because you did it first and called it practical." She began to cry then. Not gracefully. Not the controlled tear she could produce under pressure. This was raw, shocked, angry grief. The sound of someone who had believed consequences were for other people. "I did not know," she said. "That is the entire problem. I did not know who you were." I looked out at the skyline from the 42nd floor, at the glass towers reflecting one another, each building appearing more solid than it was. "I am the man you kept underestimating." She made a sound that might have been my name, but it broke before becoming language. I did not comfort her. That was the first cruelty I consciously chose. And it did not feel like victory. It felt like amputation without anesthesia. The next 3 weeks were not dramatic in the way people imagine corporate falls. There were no shouting boardroom scenes, no elevator confrontations, no public confession beneath flashbulbs. The machine moved with quiet precision. Outside counsel interviewed Serena twice. She arrived both times with representation. The first interview she remained defensive, insisting the expense charges were misclassified but not improper. The separation agreement was personal. The communications were taken out of context, and the board had been influenced by my undisclosed role. That argument collapsed when Nadine produced the governance documents showing my role had been disclosed to the board, auditors, and legal committee for years. Serena had not known because Serena had not cared to know anything about me that did not fit her preferred picture. The second interview was colder. By then, her supporters had begun stepping back. That is how power reveals friendship. Slowly, then all at once, people stopped returning calls. The consultant who had encouraged her image management claimed he had misunderstood the personal circumstances. The executive who once praised her visibility said the board needed stability. Meredith stopped emailing and began sending messages through Victor. Victor's attorneys sent letters thick with outrage and thin on law. Nadine answered them with citations. Each response was shorter than the threat that prompted it. At home, Serena became a ghost with a pulse. She slept in the bedroom. I slept in the guest room. We moved through the kitchen at different hours. Once I found her standing before the open refrigerator at midnight, looking at nothing. She had not turned on the overhead light. The cool interior glow lit her face from below, making her look younger and older at the same time. I said you should close it. She flinched, then shut the refrigerator. For a moment, neither of us moved. I lost everything, she said. No. She turned toward me. Her eyes were swollen. No. You lost what you were trying to take. She laughed once, bitter and breathless. There it is. The moral clarity. You must enjoy this. I wanted to say I did not. The truth was worse. There were moments when I did enjoy parts of it. Not her pain, but the correction. The clean alignment of action and consequence. The sight of arrogance discovering structure. But enjoyment came in brief cold flashes and left behind ash. I do not enjoy living in the ruins of my own marriage, I said. Then why are you still here? Because legally and practically it is cleaner until we file. Her face twisted. Cleaner? Listen to you. You sound like them now. No, I said. I sound like someone who finally learned from you. She looked as if I had slapped her. Then she whispered, I loved you. I believed you did. That broke something in the room. She sat down at the kitchen table, hard, as if her legs had failed. You believed her. Past tense. I leaned against the counter because standing upright had suddenly become work. Serena, love that requires me to be smaller every year is not love I can survive. She covered her face. I was scared of what? Of being dismissed. Of working twice as hard and still being seen as someone's wife. Of getting close enough to the top and losing it because people decided my life looked unserious. Of them finding something to laugh at. So you gave them May. She did not deny it. That was the nearest thing to honesty she had offered in months. The days after that became a long, suffocating middle, not because anything spectacular happened, but because everything ordinary became unbearable. The house carried the weight of unsaid things. The coffee machine clicked in the morning like a verdict. The mail slid through the slot with the dry sound of documents arriving to finish what feelings had started. Serena's clothes remained in the closet, arranged by color and function, executive armor with nowhere to go. Her phone buzzed less each day. The silence around her career widened, and with it came small losses that seemed to humiliate her more than the large ones. A conference invitation was withdrawn. A magazine profile was postponed indefinitely. A leadership dinner proceeded without her. Someone removed her from a private group thread, and she found out when a former colleague referenced a decision she had not seen. She began trying to regain control in small domestic ways. She reorganized the pantry at 2 in the morning, labeling glass jars with a precision that bordered on violence. She replaced the towels in the guest bathroom I was using with older ones, then denied noticing. She left articles about reputational overreach and board politics open on the dining table. She took calls with her attorney in the hall outside my room, speaking just loudly enough for phrases to carry. Undisclosed conflict, spousal retaliation, abuse of control. I listened once, then put on headphones. That angered her more than confrontation would have. One afternoon, Meredith arrived without warning. I found her in the living room, still wearing sunglasses though she was indoors. Serena sat beside her, rigid, as if embarrassed by needing rescue. Meredith removed her gloves finger by finger. Adrian, she said, we need to find a humane off-ramp. I stood near the doorway. Humane for whom? For everyone. That word again. Everyone. It almost never includes the person being asked to disappear. Victor is prepared to reduce the legal temperature, Meredith said. Serena can resign quietly. The company can avoid further embarrassment, and the marital matter can be handled with dignity. Dignity. She looked at me with a flash of irritation. Yes, dignity. We understand you are angry. No, Meredith, you understand I have leverage. That is not the same thing. Serena looked down at her hands. Her mother did not. Meredith had spent a lifetime turning discomfort into superiority. What do you want, Adrian? I thought about that. Once the answer would have been simple. My wife back. My marriage repaired. The woman from the side gallery. The barefoot woman in the kitchen. But that woman existed now only in memory, and memory had become an unreliable witness. I want the review completed, I said. I want the divorce clean. I want no false claims about my conduct, capacity, finances, or influence. I want the agreement your family drafted preserved, because if anyone attempts to distort the facts, it becomes evidence. Meredith's mouth tightened. You are punishing her. I am refusing to protect her from what she did. She stood. For the first time since I had known her, she looked genuinely angry. Not offended. Angry. You were never enough for her world. Serena whispered, Mother. Meredith kept looking at me. We tried to be kind about that. There was the family creed, finally spoken in its purest form. Cruelty as kindness, erasure as refinement, disposal as help. I nodded. You should leave. She seemed startled, as if houses themselves should side with mothers. Serena did not move. Meredith looked at her daughter, waiting for support. None came. That was another small collapse. She put her gloves back on and walked out without saying goodbye. After she left, Serena sat very still. I thought she might apologize. Instead she said, She is not wrong that you never wanted this world. No, I said, I never wanted to become it. A week later, Serena resigned. The announcement was concise. Personal reasons, gratitude for colleagues, confidence in Halcyon's future. There was no mention of suspension, review, or the board's unanimous decision to proceed with a different candidate. Corporate language is a graveyard where truth is buried in polished boxes. The market barely moved. That hurt her too. She had believed her rise was central to the company narrative. The company absorbed her absence by lunchtime. The divorce filing happened 2 months after the dinner. By then the house had become unlivable emotionally, though all the furniture remained where it had always been. We negotiated through attorneys. Serena did not fight as hard as I expected. That frightened me more than resistance. People who have lost a public war often save themselves for a private one, but Serena seemed emptied out by the scale of her miscalculation. Her settlement was fair, not generous in the way Victor's envelope had been performatively generous, but fair under the law and cleaner than she deserved. I did not need revenge by then. Revenge burns hot. What remained in me was colder and more durable. She asked to meet once before the final signing. I agreed because I knew refusal would leave a question in me, and I was tired of carrying questions. We met in a quiet hotel lounge on a rainy afternoon, neutral ground with soft chairs and low lamps. Serena arrived early. That alone told me something had changed. She used to arrive exactly when arrival made the strongest impression. She wore grey, no executive black, no jewelry except her wedding ring, which she had not removed. Her hair was down, and without the armor of presentation she looked smaller, not physically, but structurally, like a building after internal walls have been taken out. Thank you for coming, she said. I sat across from her, of course. We ordered coffee neither of us wanted. For a while, rain made thin paths down the window beside us. She watched it as if waiting for language to arrive from outside. I keep replaying that night, she said. So do I. She flinched slightly. I suppose you would. I said nothing. She turned the cup by its saucer. My father says you planned it from the beginning. Your father needs me to be a villain, so he does not have to be one. A sad smile moved across her face and vanished. He hates you. I know. My mother says I should hate you too. Do you? She looked up. I want to. Some days I do. Then some days I wake up and remember that I handed them the knife and acted surprised when you bled. It was the closest she had come to confession. I felt it land but not soften me. That was another permanent change. Once a sentence like that would have opened every locked door in me. Now it only entered a room already emptied. Why did you not tell me, she asked. Tell you what? Who you were. I looked at her for a long time. You knew who I was. You did not know what I controlled. Her eyes filled, but she did not cry yet. That is not fair, no. It is exact. She pressed her lips together. I was ashamed of me, of needing something you did not seem to need, of wanting rooms and names and recognition so badly that it made me feel cheap around you. You made contentment look easy, and I hated you for it because I could not find it anywhere in myself. That was the first true thing she said without defending it. I said you could have told me that. She laughed under her breath, broken. And then what? You would have given me some wise, quiet sentence and made me feel even smaller. Maybe. She looked at me then, and for a moment I saw the woman from the gallery again, not restored, not forgiven, just visible through damage. Did you ever love me, Adrian? Yes. When did you stop? The answer had lived in me since the restaurant. I did not have to search for it. The night your family put a price on my absence, and you let them. She closed her eyes. A tear slipped down, not dramatic, not useful, simply there. I thought I could fix it later. No, I said. You thought there would be a later, because there always had been. She opened her eyes. And now there is paperwork. The cruelty of that answer surprised even me. But I did not take it back. Something in her face folded inward. She nodded once slowly, accepting not forgiveness but the absence of it. Halcyon announced its new CEO the following week, a woman named Priya Raman, steady, brilliant, untheatrical, respected by engineers and feared by fools. The announcement was well received. Serena's name did not appear in any article, except one speculative piece about executive turnover that vanished beneath market news within a day. The world moved on with an indifference that felt more brutal than scandal. The divorce finalized in late autumn. The day I signed the last document, the air outside smelled like wet leaves and cold pavement. My attorney congratulated me gently, as if survival were a victory. I thanked her because she meant well. Then I walked alone for 40 minutes through streets where no one knew anything had ended. Couples passed me under umbrellas. A delivery cyclist cursed at a car. Somewhere a dog barked from an apartment balcony. Life did not pause for the death of my marriage. That seemed correct and unforgivable. I went back to the house Serena had once called unaligned. I stood in the kitchen, where she had first told me I felt like safety. The ceramic bowl was still on the counter. The cutting board still held my father's knife marks. The champagne she had bought for her expected ascent remained unopened in the refrigerator for months, until one night I poured it down the sink without ceremony. It foamed briefly against the drain, then disappeared. People imagine that winning gives you back what humiliation took. It does not. It rearranges the damage into something you can carry. I kept the company. I kept control. I kept the truth. Serena lost the promotion, the image, the marriage, and the future she had tried to purchase with my disappearance. Victor lost the illusion that rooms obeyed him. Meredith lost the satisfaction of having been subtle. But none of that restored the years when I let small corrections become a life. None of it gave me back the version of myself who heard his wife call him grounded and believed she meant whole. Months later, a letter came from Serena. Handwritten, no attorney, no demand. I let it sit unopened on the table for 3 days. When I finally read it, it was not an apology exactly. It was a map of wreckage. She wrote that she had moved into a smaller apartment across the city, that her parents were no longer advising her because she could not bear the sound of their certainty, that she had started consulting work under a name no one recognized, that some mornings she still reached for a phone full of rooms that had closed to her. She wrote that she understood now that she had confused being seen with being valued. She wrote that she did not expect a response. At the bottom she wrote, I did not know how to love something that did not need to be displayed. I folded the letter and placed it in a drawer. I did not respond. That is where the story ends, not because everything finished, but because some endings are not events. They are conditions. Serena continued somewhere beyond my sight, diminished but alive, learning perhaps, or only surviving. Victor and Meredith remained wealthy, which meant no one forced them to understand anything they did not wish to understand. Halcyon continued. The board met. Priya led. The company grew. My signature still mattered in rooms where my name was rarely spoken aloud. And I remained. That was all. I remained in the house that had once been proof of my simplicity and later became evidence of my concealment. I remained in the silence after the performance ended. I remained with the knowledge that I had not been weak because I was quiet, but I had been late in understanding how eagerly the wrong people will build a cage around your restraint and call it your natural place. On the first anniversary of the dinner, I returned to the Merrow room alone, not out of sentiment, not for revenge. I wanted to know whether the room still had power over me. The same host greeted me. The same low light touched the same white tablecloths. I requested the private room and sat at the same table. No envelope waited beside my plate. No one adjusted cufflinks. No one avoided my eyes. I ordered water, then steak, then coffee. The meal was technically excellent and tasted like nothing. At the end, the waiter asked if I wanted dessert. I almost said no. Then I ordered the chocolate torte Serena had once loved and ate half of it slowly, listening to the muted sound of other people's lives beyond the door. When the bill came, I paid, left a generous tip, and walked out into a cold, clear night. Outside, the city was bright and indifferent. I stood under the awning for a moment where I had called Elliot 1 year before. My reflection appeared in the restaurant glass, older than I remembered, composed in a way that no longer felt chosen. Behind my reflection, inside, a young couple laughed over wine. The woman touched the man's sleeve and he leaned toward her, open, unguarded. For a second, I wanted to warn him, not about her because I knew nothing about her, but about the danger of mistaking being chosen for being known. I did not. Some lessons cannot be gifted. They have to arrive with an envelope across a table, or a closed door, or a silence that finally stops protecting the people who made it necessary. I walked to my car. It was still the older one Serena had hated. The engine started on the second turn. I sat there with my hands on the wheel and felt no triumph, only the plain cold shape of a life after illusion. I had survived, yes. I had won, if winning means the plot against me failed, and the people who underestimated me learned the cost of doing so. But survival had not made me whole, and victory had not made me warm. It had only made me exact. That is the part no one tells you about power. Power can stop people from taking what is yours. It can expose them. It can end careers, silence threats, freeze rooms, and turn hidden signatures into thunder. But it cannot make the person who betrayed you become someone who would not have done it. It cannot restore the version of love that existed before contempt learned your address. It cannot give you back the years you spent translating insults into pressure, pressure into stress, stress into ambition, ambition into something you thought you were supposed to endure. I drove home through dark streets, past office towers where other people were still climbing, still performing, still confusing height with safety. In the passenger seat, the empty space remained empty. I did not turn on music. I listened to the engine, the tires, the city passing in long cold lines of light. Somewhere behind me was the restaurant, the table, the room where my marriage ended before anyone admitted it. Somewhere ahead was the house. Not home exactly. Not anymore. A structure, quiet and intact, holding what was left of me without asking what shape I had been before. The next morning, Halcyon held a board meeting. I attended remotely with my camera off. Priya spoke for 20 minutes about expansion into emergency medical logistics and disaster response routing. She was precise, unglamorous, devastatingly competent. No one mentioned Serena. No one mentioned the review. No one mentioned the envelope. The machine had absorbed the damage and continued forward. After the meeting ended, Elliot stayed on the line. "Adrian," he said. "Yes, are you all right?" It was the first time anyone in that world had asked me that without wanting something from the answer. I looked at the blank screen, at my own faint reflection in it. "No," I said. He was quiet. "But I am clear. Sometimes that is what we get instead." I ended the call and sat there as morning light entered the room. It touched the table, the floor, the old watch on my wrist. It did not heal anything. Light does not heal. It only shows what remains. What remained was enough to stand inside, but not enough to call peace. And maybe that was the only honest ending available. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, not a dramatic ruin where everyone received precisely what they deserved. Just a man who had been priced, threatened, underestimated, and finally seen too late, sitting alone in a room he owned, with a company still under his control, a marriage permanently dead, and a silence that no longer meant weakness because no one was close enough to mistake it for anything else.